The table set with stories untold, whispers linger in the marrow's hold. A feast of shadows on porcelain white. Was it caravan unserved that night? Did the dust of death fall by her hand, or fate's cruel twist in life's demand? Questions echo through the courtroom's air. Guilt or innocence, does she even care? The forest yields both gift and curse, a healer's touch or a witch's verse, a simmered brew, a secret steeped, a love betrayed or secrets deep. Did the dust of death fall by her hand, or fate's cruel twist in life's demand? Questions echo through the courtroom's air. Guilt or innocence, does she even care?
Hello, and welcome back to the part 2 of the Erin Patterson mushroom murder case. Now, we've given you a basic recap at the start of this video for part 1. If you'd like to watch the full video, that is available within this playlist. There's part 1, and this is the second half, which will include the verdict when we get one. So, we left off after we'd gone through the timeline that led right up to where Gail and Don and Heather had suddenly lost their lives at the hospital. So we now move to the investigation and the trial. And we jumped forward to now June of 2023. This is when the prosecution believe that Erin began laying the groundwork for what they would later call the first calculated steps of deception. So this is the basic timeline here. So from June 23, Erin begins fabricating a story about her medical concerns. She apparently tells Gail about a lump on her arm that needs to be biopsied. And she also goes to have an MRI, tells her she goes to have an MRI. And that she would know the results of those ultrasound, the biopsy and the MRI results a little bit later on. A week later, when Gail asked about the tests, Erin replied cryptically that there's a bit to digest with everything that's come out of it all. I might talk more about it with you when I see you in person. These messages prompted Gail to note in her diary that Erin had an appointment at St. Vincent's Hospital for her arm lump. But the police would later discover that no such medical appointment ever existed. Erin's Medicare records show that no visits to St. Vincent's Hospital were ever made, and the hospital had no record of her as a patient. What was real, however, was Erin's plan for a special lunch. By late July, Gail had marked her calendar Saturday the 29th of July 2023, lunch at Erin's with Heather and Ian. As the lunch date approached, Erin extended invitations to Don and Gail Patterson, as well as Gail's sister, Heather Wilkinson, and her husband, Ian. He was the Baptist minister who had once impressed Erin with his sermons on love. Simon was also invited, which is her estranged husband, but he declined the day before, saying that he felt too uncomfortable to attend. His refusal triggered an emotional response from Erin, who complained that she had spent many hours during the week preparing this lunch, and it had been exhausting in light of the issues that she was facing, and spent a small fortune on fillet beef because she wanted it to be a special meal, because she may not be able to host a lunch like this again for some time. Sounds a little bit like gaslighting to me. In reality, as she would later admit in court, she didn't do any prep other than shopping and researching the recipe. On July 23rd and 28th, Erin visited Woolworths purchasing mushrooms, fillet steak, and pastry for her planned beef Wellington, a dish that she'd chosen because her mother had made it for special occasions. And rather than following the recipe's instruction to make one large beef Wellington to be sliced, Erin opted for individual portions, a deviation that prosecutors would later suggest allowed her to control exactly which servings contained poison. During preparation, Erin claimed that she found the mushroom paste bland and decided to add dried mushrooms from a Tupperware container that she believed contained mushrooms from an Asian grocer. This seemingly innocent decision would later become central to the case against her. On the afternoon of July 29, 2023, while Erin's children were at a movie with a friend, the four elderly guests arrived at the Leongatha home. The atmosphere was cordial. Heather and Gail even explored Erin's pantry, which made her feel both proud and slightly uncomfortable about its messiness. In the kitchen, Erin plated individual beef Wellingtons alongside mashed potatoes and beans. She prepared gravy from ready-made sachets and served it in a pitcher. Don, Gail, Ian, and Heather each took a plate with no assigned seating arrangements. As they ate, Don finished his Wellington and then consumed the uneaten half of Gail's portion. Erin later claimed she ate only a quarter to a third of her own serving. After the meal, Erin chose this moment to reveal what she had presented as serious health news. She told her guests she was concerned about what might be cancer, claiming she needed advice about telling her children about this threat to my life. Quote. Ian, the minister, led the group in prayer for Erin's health and wisdom. Now, this is a slide that shows on the top Erin Patterson and her estranged husband Simon, and then the victims below being Heather Wilkinson to the left, Gail Patterson to the middle, and Don Patterson to the right, both being Simon's parents. And the lone survivor to the bottom on the left-hand side is Ian Wilkinson, who is the pastor from their local church. What none of them knew was that this cancer concern was entirely fabricated. A ruse that Erin would later testify was to mask her embarrassment about planned gastric bypass surgery and to secure their help with childcare during her recovery. After the guests departed, Erin claimed that she'd consumed most of an orange cake Gail had brought and then felt sick and vomited. That night, she experienced diarrhea but didn't connect any symptoms to anything sinister. The next morning, on Sunday, July the 30th, Simon called with alarming news. All four lunch guests were in the hospital with severe symptoms. By Monday morning, after dropping her children at school, Erin went to Leongatha Hospital, seeking treatment for what she described as dehydration. There, Dr. Webster delivering the shocking news her lunch guests were suffering from what appeared to be the death cap mushroom poisoning, Don and Gail Patterson and Heather Wilkinson were critically ill. Only Ian Wilkinson would ultimately survive. Erin's reaction, as described by the hospital staff, was peculiar. When advised to go to Monash Medical Centre in Melbourne for treatment, she left, promising to return 20 to 30 minutes later, but took about 90 minutes. During this time, police contacted her requesting leftovers from the meal. At the hospital, Erin later told doctors that she had fed her children leftovers from the beef Wellington after scraping off the mushrooms. She claimed that her children did not like mushrooms. The claim prompted urgent concern for the children's health in case there were traces of the poison in them. But Erin was initially reluctant to have them brought in, citing their anxiety about hospitals. Well, wouldn't you want to put their health needs in front of their anxieties? You know, just saying. A pivotal moment occurred whilst at the hospital. Erin told Simon and the children that she had previously dehydrated and powdered mushrooms for the children's meals. When the children stepped out, Simon directly confronted her. Is that how you poisoned my parents, using that dehydrator? Of course not, she replied. But by her own testimony, this accusation planted a seed of realization about all the times she had used the dehydrator and how she had dried foraged mushrooms in it weeks earlier. The cover-up. On August the 2nd, 2023, with her lunch guests fighting for their lives, Erin Patterson drove to the Coonawarra transfer station, the local tip as it was known, and deposited said food dehydrator. CCTV footage captured that visit, and her bank records confirmed the transaction. In court, she would claim this disposal was motivated by panic. Child protection was coming to my house that afternoon, and I was scared of the conversation that might flow about the meal, the dehydrator. I was scared that they would blame me for it, blame me for making everyone sick, and I was scared they'd take the children away. Around this time, Erin also began manipulating her digital footprint. She stopped using her original phone, dubbed Phone A by prosecutors, and SIM card, transferring the other device, Phone B. She performed multiple factory resets on the second phone, later admitting she did so because there was photos in there of mushrooms in the dehydrator, and I just panicked and I didn't want them to see them. Perhaps the most damning after police seized phone B during their investigation, Erin remotely triggered another factory reset while the device was in police custody. Now, I thought it was mandatory that you put the phone instantly into airplane mode when you've seized a mobile phone with potential evidence. Doesn't seem that that had been done. Perhaps the most damning after police seized phone B during their investigations. Oh, read that bit. I wonder if I can log into my Google account and see where all my devices are. She later testified, thinking, I wonder if they've been silly enough to leave it connected to the internet. And so I hit factory reset to see what happened. And it did. On August the 5th, 2023, police executed a search warrant at Erin's home because Don, Gail, and Heather had all lost their lives. Among the items they found were Recipe Tin Eats cookbooks with a beef Wellington recipe, spattered with cooking liquids, and an instruction manual for a Sunbeam food dehydrator in a kitchen drawer. During her interview at Wonthaggi Police Station that day, Erin's statements directly contradicted evidence that would later emerge. Have you ever foraged for mushrooms? Detective asked. Never, 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 she replied emphatically. Do you preserve or dehydrate food? He asked. No. When questioned about the dehydrator manual found in the kitchen, she claimed, "I've got manuals of lots of stuff like that. Over the years, I've had all sorts of appliances and I just keep them all." She suggested she had owned a dehydrator about 8 or 9 years ago. Meanwhile, forensic analysts at the recovered dehydrator found that the tip revealed traces of death cap mushrooms. Police also uncovered discrepancies in Erin's digital life. She'd apparently been using 3 phones, 2 Samsung Galaxies and a Nokia, and switching her main SIM card between devices. The original phone, phone A, was never located despite police searches. By November 2nd, 2023, the evidence was sufficient for authorities to arrest Erin Patterson and formally charge her with 3 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. In the Victorian Supreme Court, sitting at Morwell in mid-2025, Erin Patterson's trial unveiled a complex web of deceptions and contradictions. On the witness stand, she admitted to multiple lies, fabricating cancer concerns, exaggerating meal preparations, misleading about medical appointments, and denying ownership of the dehydrator. She claimed these were panic-driven responses rather than evidence of criminal intent. The prosecution, led by Dr. Nanette Rogers SC, built her case around 4 calculated deceptions. 1. The fabricated cancer claim. 2. The lethal doses of poison in the individual Wellingtons. 3. Erin's attempts to appear as a victim of poisoning herself. And 4. Her sustained cover-up efforts. The sinister deception, Rogers told the jury, was to use a nourishing meal as the vehicle to deliver the deadly poison. The prosecution highlighted Erin's knowledge of mushroom locations through the website iNaturalist, cell tower data placing her near known death cap mushroom sites. Her purchase at subsequent disposal of the dehydrator and her digital manipulation to conceal evidence. Most damning was the contradiction between Erin's initial denials and the forensic evidence. Despite claiming that she never foraged for mushrooms, investigators found evidence that she had searched for death cap mushrooms locations on the iNaturalist website and had photos of foraged mushrooms on her devices, photos she desperately tried to delete through factory resets. In her defence, Colin Mandy SC emphasised the absence of motive. Well, as you know, we don't have to prove a motive. We have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. Without a motive, you're left guessing about the most important element of the offence, intention. Intention does play a part in the charges because that is the difference between first and second degree murder. He portrayed Erin as a woman who loved her in-laws and had absolutely no reason to harm them. If you're planning a murder, Mandy argued regarding the dehydrator's disposal, what's the one thing you really should plan to dispose of? That's the murder weapon. She would have disposed of it months before and never told anyone that she had one. Instead, she drives to the tip in her own car, pays for the disposal of the dehydrator with her own bank card, doesn't attempt to disguise those actions in any way. Is that because maybe she's not that bright? Perhaps. She'd admitted to several lies and actions that she'd previously denied. Those are, as I said, the disposing of the dehydrator, She was worried because child protection was coming to her house and she was scared that they would blame her. Is that consciousness of guilt? She did admit to having multiple phones and manipulating those phones to delete evidence. But it was a little bit sloppy of the police to not have put that into airplane mode, which would have prevented all that. The Crown presented evidence of inconsistencies regarding what Erin had told medical personnel, police, and child protection workers about feeding leftovers to the children. She'd claimed that she'd served her children leftover beef Wellington with mushrooms and pastry scraped off it. And the children told police that they were told these were leftovers, but Erin had denied telling them specifically they were from the lunch. She told the children had eaten leftovers from the beef Wellington and suggested Erin was reluctant to have the children medically assessed because she knew that they hadn't actually eaten any of the poisoned food. During the cross-examination, Erin was forced to admit another lie. She had claimed to be planning gastric bypass surgery at the Enrich Clinic in Melbourne, but the Crown established the Enrich Clinic does not offer and has never offered pre-surgery assessments related to gastric bypassing or any procedures beyond skin, hair, and nail treatments. Perhaps you might want to do a little bit more research. So the key evidence during the trial that was presented by the medical toxicology was that the victims' deaths were actually confirmed to be from the death cap mushroom poisoning, and that traces of the death cap mushrooms were found in that recovered dehydrator. The beef Wellington recipe book with its cooking stains were presented as evidence. The manual for the Sunbeam food dehydrator was found in the kitchen drawer, was also presented, and the video of her disposing of that dehydrator on the CCTV footage at the tip was another key piece of evidence. The digital and electronic evidence basically said that there was no medical records that were supporting any of Erin's claims for her health. Evidence of Erin's searching for death cap mushroom locations online. There was cell tower data placing Erin near known death cap mushroom sites where they're grown. They grow only in specific areas in Victoria and in specific environments, and there are very few and far between. That she had multiple phone factory resets on 3 phones and triggering one whilst the phone was in police custody. The prosecution's arguments were built, as I said, on the 4 calculated deceptions: the fabricated cancer claim, the lethal doses of poison in each individual Wellington, the feigning of her illness to appear as if she was a victim as well, and the concerted efforts to cover up and dispose of evidence, both physical and digital. They said that the knowledge and intent through the mushrooms highlighted the contradictions in Erin's testimony. The prosecution presented a case based on the 4 calculated... Oh, I've said that. Erin had actually claimed to have had a biopsy and an MRI scheduled, and she'd told her luncheon guests that she'd had cancer and needed advice on how to approach that subject by telling her children. The prosecution suggested these lies were made believable. Her lie would die with them. The fact that she had made individual portions of the beef Wellingtons showed that she could control what was in the ingredients and that she could distribute them to each different guest. And it was also told that she served her beef Wellington up on a plate that was a completely different colour to the rest of them. Her feigned illnesses when she presented at Leongatha Hospital or Dandenong Hospital showed no signs of serious illness whatsoever. The prosecution argued that it was inexplicable why only she didn't fall fatally ill. She'd lied about where she'd purchased the mushrooms, first claiming that she'd purchased them at Woolworths and then claiming it to be an Asian grocer. Concealing her usual mobile phone from police and lying about feeding her children the leftovers. There was also a fifth deception that the prosecution added, and that was the lie regarding the planned gastric bypassing at a clinic that doesn't even offer the procedures. They emphasised that while they couldn't establish a motive, their burden was only to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the accused did this deliberately. The defence's arguments basically surrounded the absence of a motive in claiming that Erin loved her in-laws with no reason to harm them. They suggested that accidental contamination through forage mushrooms could have occurred. They portrayed post-incident actions as panic and not guilt. And they argued that the dehydrator disposal method was inconsistent with a premeditated murder. They cited Erin's cooperation with police, giving access codes to her phones and pointing to the leftovers. So she was compliant. Closing arguments. The defence case centred on the two key questions. Is there a reasonable possibility that death cap mushrooms were put into the meal by accident? And is there a reasonable possibility that Erin did not intend to kill or cause serious injury? The prosecution, again, based their arguments on the full calculated deceptions we mentioned earlier. This Erin Patterson trial centres around whether she deliberately poisoned her in-laws and relatives with the death cap mushrooms, or whether it was a tragic accident. The prosecution built a circumstantial case based on her deceptions, evidence of premeditation, and actions after the deaths. The defence emphasised the lack of motive and portrayed her post-lunch behaviour as panic, rather than a calculated cover-up. This case ultimately hinges on whether the jury believes there is a reasonable possibility that the poisoning was accidental. In June 2025, where we are right now, closing arguments concluded and the fate of Erin Patterson is resting with the 12 jurors who would retire to consider a central question. Was the deadly lunch a calculated act of murder or a tragic accident followed by panic-driven deception? The prosecution had presented a compelling case of circumstantial evidence and a conscious cover-up, but acknowledged that they couldn't establish why Erin would want to kill her elderly relatives. The defence too maintained that without a credible motive, the jury could not exclude the reasonable possibility that the death cap mushrooms had contaminated the meal accidentally, and that Erin's subsequent deceptions stemmed from panic rather than guilt.
Did the dust of death fall by her hand, or fate's cruel twist in life's demand? Questions echo through the courtroom's air. Guilt or innocence, does she even care? The forest yields both gift and curse, a healer's touch or a witch's verse, a simmered brew, a secret steeped, a love betrayed or secrets deep.